Hello. Today I like to talk of the United States hybrid war, the so-called hybrid wars of nowadays. But first, we have to understand the history of the economic evolution as well as armed forces evolutions briefly after the Second World War. To understand why the situation is like it is today. After the Second World War, the United States was a military and economic giant. Europe was devastated, Japan, Asia as well. So in those days, the United States was only challenged by the Soviet Union, but it was not a danger in itself, the Soviet Union, although it was a mighty power. But of course, with the turning to communism in the year of 48 in China, the danger of the so-called Western world, I may say the capitalist world, because Europe, Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, including India, were capitalist dominated countries. So the challenge was to stop communism and then ultimately to defeat it with the Cannon doctrine waiting and circling the Soviet Union and China until their own contradictions made them collapse. That was the United States view, and was followed by the Europeans, mainly the Europeans, the capitalists, because they saw the danger close to their homelands. Keeping in mind that the United States forces were structured on classical basis, the so-called third generation warfare between second and third generation warfare. I may say the second generation warfare was the First World War. The third generation warfare was the Second World War and the subsequent and the follows the war that follows in South Korea. But then we had the unconventional warfares in Indochina, first with the French, second with the intervention after the 60s, when the French retired and collapsed their colonies. Then the intervention in the United States was a classical army against a sort of a guerrilla army. It was an asymmetric and unconventional warfare. To make it short, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, things changed. But prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union or capitulation, that is a better word to understand it. When the Soviet Union rejected the leadership, the ruling class, some part of it, the counter-revolutionaries, rejected their systems and returned to the restoration of the capitalist in the Soviet Union, and especially when it collapses as a union, there were about different republics. So after that period, the United States, as the sole superpower, face different kinds of problems. And from the lessons that received in the Vietnam War, it changed its doctrines in the sense that the United States didn't face another land power or war in Europe, but their doctrines changed after the lessons received in Vietnam, and tried to establish new doctrines. In the army, they start with the light divisions around the year 60s, around the year 80s. And with the light divisions, start to think about the problems in the Central Command, which was established later. But in that area, the Islam, let's put it this way, the Islam area in the Middle East, even they trained with the Egyptian forces, although this is a different story, because the United States supported the Egyptian army after the peace agreement with Israel. So they were thinking about the next problems in the Middle East, because they saw the problem arising in that area, and the lesson learned. But what happened to the Russians in Afghanistan? So the doctrine or their grand strategy, to have a grand strategy, you have to have also a doctrine of the armed forces, a new one. and they changed to make a lighted army. They reduced the navy from 600 vessels to about 250, 300. Then it decreases as well. And the amount of air carrier battle groups, not substantially, because to dominate the seas, of course, have to have the power, the air power, naval air power. But the problem it faces were of a different nature, militarily and economically. So the enemy capitulated. There were no more communism in the world to threaten the United States as a capitalist system and as a military power, which was the guarantor to the rest of the capitalist countries in the world that they will be protected. Things change in the economy as well, because after the Second World War, the industrial countries of Europe, they were very much destroyed, as well as Japan. But it took about 20, 30 years to make it simple. And by the year in the 70s, after after the withdrawal from, let's put it this way, the withdrawal from Vietnam, from the military point, it was a shock that lasted about almost 15, 20 years to the United States Armed Forces. And at the same time, the shock was economic as well, because Japan started to be an economic power. Then came South Korea, Taiwan, and in Europe, the rebirth of the industrial nations. Germany, France, in a lesser way, Italy, not Spain until the year 80s, 90s, although Spain never was a very serious competitor to the United States, and the UK. But after the years 80s and 90s, by the end of the century, the United States was not the only economic power. They faced the competition from the Europe and the embryonic European Union. And since China changed their economic system around the death of Mao Zedong, about the year 75, and started with exploring the possibilities to change with Deng Xiaoping, with the economic special zones. And since they realized that they should change their system because their system was growing but very, very slowly. So they changed to the capitalist system. And then the United States failed. They were threatened by the new realities, the new economic realities. And then United States in this century, the first 21st century, is no longer the sole economic power. China has an economy of around 18 trillion. European Union another 18 trillions dollars, and United States around that figures. I'm trying to make it simple with the numbers. The idea is to have a picture of the economic situations. So we have the losing ground in the economy, and I have to mention that in the last 50 years, less than that, in the second part of the 20th century, after the war, the corporations started to be transnational corporations, and then the capitalist was evolving and changing and adjusting to the new international situations. Let's remind that the United States established the rules with the World Bank, the International Monetary Bank, the Bank of Settlements, and then the International Court of Justice, and all those institutions related with the United Nations. But there were, especially under the rule and direction of the United States. What I like to point out is that from being an economic superpower, the United States lost that power and had to share it with other industrial nations which are competitors. But capitalism is very elastic and changing, and the capitalists of the United States, as well as powerful capitalists of Europe, understood that they have to be global, and that's what they did. And with the international trade of commerce and arrangements, we have the Uruguay, the Doha rulings, so to speak. We have to include the financial systems. With the United States retired the Bretton Woods Agreement, and in the year 73 made under the Nixon administrations reverse the backup of the dollar by gold. It was inconvertible. So we see change in the economic sphere and financial sphere as well. And up to the present day, when the control of the finance, global finances, is the engine of the mean or the tool to control the economic situation in the world. But this is fluid, because since the capitalists, the super capitalists, they don't have, they are really internationals. They don't care about nations. So once in a while they get together, and they have these clubs. They try to arrange things, but they are competitors as well between them. But as a whole, they have a grip in the financial circulation of the world, based in New York and London. But why I'm saying all this? Because since the United States as an economic superpower lost ground, it has to retain its power under military basis. I'm remembering Arnold Toynbee in his studies of civilizations, and he states that when empires they're losing their control, they start to try to avoid this sort of losing ground by military means. And that's why the United States is doing nowadays. Because their challenge is to be, let's say, one of the ruling empires, if you like to employ that word, and to share the empire with some emerging countries like China and Russia in a second dimension, because Russia is not a challenge to the United States economically. It's not a challenge. The only challenge the United States faces is on the financial world to lose the control of the financial system, which is based in the dollar as a reserve currency. And they are very concerned because that's what gives the strength to the United States up to the present. Although there are some new challenge, because the Chinese with the Russians and with the Brazilian try to trade in different currencies, and they are doing themselves. They are so particularly concerned about this that one of the reasons that they invaded Iraq was that Saddam Hussein wanted to trade in euros. And in Libya, Gaddafi wanted to create a new currency backed by gold. By the way, China and Russia, they are backing their currencies with a very important stock of gold. So that reverses the idea of the inconvertibility of currencies. Although currencies are based on the power as a whole of a given country and the stability. So this is the situation which United States faces, and the debt it created, financing the wars and financing the lack of trade, the lack of control of the international trade, as it has previously in the 60s and 70s, and of course the 50s. And that's one of the reasons that it tried to control by different means. And these means evolve in time. To control certain areas in the 60s and 70s, they did it indirectly by supporting the dictators in South America especially, but in Asia, in Philippines, Indonesia, in Africa. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, with the new wave of, let's say, democracies, in the sense that the United States couldn't support dictators, because always dictators took powers with the pretension and the excuse that they were trying to protect their countries against the communism, but communism is no longer exist as a threat to the capitalists so far. So it changed and was experiences with different kinds of regime change. And nowadays they had the regime change politically and the unconventional warfare. And we put those placed together, those lines of actions, we come to the so-called hybrid wars with non-state actors. And this type of hybrid wars are what we are seeing nowadays. And I liked in the next talk about these problems, I like to be more specific. I will be more specific about the techniques of the regime change, the techniques of the public diplomacy, and the subversions of countries within and from outside, which is a very elaborate and sophisticated way of action, and countries that are under attack find very difficult to protect or put up countermeasures. In the next talks, I will talk about this particular problem, which is very, very interesting one. Thank you.